do my breakfast. Good everyone, welcome along. I'm just waiting for Linda and Stacey to join us, and I'm just going to find them on our screen here and see if
I'm here.
You're here. Linda's here. Fantastic. So welcome along everyone to our Q&A today. A bit of a more relaxed chat with everyone as much as we can. We've got a bit over 40 people registered for this event, so I think we'll be having people popping in and out as we go. So we'll try and keep it as interactive as we can, but in saying that, hopefully we can at least answer some questions that we've been sent and anything that may come up during the course of our morning tea chat this morning. I just wanted to alert you to the fact that this is something we're running to raise awareness for the Student Volunteer Army, the organisation that's doing some fantastic work at the moment for our essential workers, and they're particularly looking after the families of those that are still having to work during this lockdown period, making sure that groceries are being done and childcare is arranged. So if you haven't already, I'll pop up a link at the end where you can hop over and just donate what you can to this great organisation that's working during our lockdown period. Stacey, we got you here. I can't see you on my screen. Can you
Yep, I'm here.
Say something? Excellent.
I'm here. Hi.
From the void. All right.
Yeah,
so just before we go on, can I just ask that if anyone hasn't got their computer on mute, if you could just mute it, just so that allows everyone to be able to hear myself or Linda or Stacey and not have the occasional cough change the screen or the cat jumping off the desk and knocking something over and letting everyone know that that's happened in your household. So that would be great. And also just to let you know, we have got a chat running. If you click down the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a chat function. And if you open that up, it will run a sidebar down the side of your screen, and you'll be able to see where people can type in questions and things like that. So what I'm going to do is very carefully try and manage the chat going on, answer some questions, leave it for Linda and Stacey to pop in when they need to add their pearls of wisdom to this, and we can get going. So if you've got any questions, just fire them up as you think of them. I'm going to open first with a couple of questions we've been sent through on email, just as a starting discussion for this morning. So we wanted to the question I had is informational resources about extending self-directed play by recognising schema or urge and planning the next steps. So this is from Alison, where they are in a entirely play-based classroom, and they're looking for ways to, I guess, respond really to the play that they're seeing, the schema or the urges they're seeing, and how to respond so that it can generate some further exploration. So Linda, would you like to go with that one to start with? You happy to do that? And Stacey, jump in when you need to.
I think the key to, as you probably all know, to this learning through play and teaching through play, the key really is loose parts. And I think if you're going to respond to children's urges, the key really is to have a good idea of what sort of loose parts you can bring in to extend that learning. Set it up on a table, set up these loose parts on a table as an invitation to extend what the children are already doing. I think too that we need to be a little bit kind to ourselves. It's not always easy when we're observing children, we're recognising the urges, and then to immediately come in with something that we can extend them with is a hard call for teachers. So I think we need to just take a step back and say, okay, I can see these children are really into trajectory. They've had the urge to, maybe pick up some blocks and start throwing them, or head outside and be throwing around bean bags or something like that. It's not exactly what we want them to do, but that's the urge. So what can I do to come in maybe the next day with some sort of support for these children? What can I set up? And that gives you time to think, because, we're so busy that we need that reflection time. And then perhaps the next day, you could come in with some little YouTube clip that shows them something that is manageable in the classroom, or you might have a book that you could bring out. You might have time to set up something. So just be a little kind to yourself on this one. Don't feel you've got to rush in straight away, but make sure that you really have a good understanding of loose parts, and make sure that that is going to, recognising the urges is going to govern what loose parts you're going to be looking for. Would you agree with that, Stacey?
Absolutely. I think well, the first thing I found when I started coaching in classrooms was it doesn't matter how far along the play journey we feel we are, or we've progressed in certain areas, that collegial collaborative approach and bringing it back to loose parts every time happens for everyone. And I always say, if I was heading back into the classroom at the start of term 2, I would be starting there as well, and embedding myself with that, even though I feel really confident with that, because well, that's not how we were trained and how we've been necessarily teaching in the past, or how we were taught, but also it's how we get to know the person, right? And so we've just got to be really mindful around those loose parts, and probably making sure we feel really confident about what those urges are, because we provide with Longworth Education provide a list that gets us started, but when we start delving into it and reading more about it, we realise there's quite a few there, and that power of observation, that sometimes we think we know what it is, the urges, and then when we start observing more and more and more, we realise that actually maybe it wasn't quite what I thought it was before. So it's really being able to get involved with it and take that time to observe.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I really learnt early on that stuck with me is that don't be afraid to wrap a real life context around things too, and talk to them about how some of the things that they're doing, it relates to real life. I remember when I was in the classroom and Sarah was coaching me, she would talk me through like if children were into trajectory and there were children that were throwing things everywhere, and she would talk to them about Robin Hood and did you know about archery, and talk to them about things that kind of spread that conversation wide, not just for them but for you too, so that you can remember that these urges have got so much scope. Because sometimes when we're just trying to manage in a classroom with urges, we think, right, connecting, get the Lego, right, transformation, let's put out some mud kitchen stuff, and they're all the right things to do, but after a while we start to feel like we don't have quite the same level of ideas that we had before. And I think sometimes just remembering that we can have those conversations that just open it up a little bit more as well.
And I think you made a good point there, Stacey, that we have to be very careful when we're observing and recognising the urges. I was at a school at the end of last year where the children were outside. They were actually building a racing track, and they had lots of blocks that they were joining together. And I said to the teacher, I wonder what urge is coming through here, and she thought it was the urge, to make a racing track and to actually race the cars. But when we looked at it more closely, they were not interested in racing cars on this track. What they were interested in was actually constructing it and putting the blocks end to end. So it was that connecting going on, and they were more interested in how they could support the blocks. When it came to actually pushing the cars along, they were very ho-hum about that. So, we have to spend time observing and maybe looking beyond what appears to be so obvious to start with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's about spending a little bit more time in observation. I think we're often quite quick to spot something and feel we've got to jump to it straight away. There's no harm in just stepping back and taking a little bit longer to observe so that we're getting quite accurate data, if you like. If we're talking at this from a data perspective, we're gathering data about our children's play through observation. And so by spending that little bit of time trying to just really work out what the urges that's sitting inside this play means, we're going to be responsive in a much more authentic way when it comes time to supporting the learners. The other thing too is just building on what Stacey said. I do enjoy extending children in a real life context. I like being able to just say, did you know? And adding a little bit into that mix so that they're understanding what they're doing and you're placing them inside that real world context. That often also helps for those learners who developmentally are shifting from pre-operational into concrete operational thought. We're talking now our year 3s, our year 4s. That idea is starting to promote a little bit more inquiry through play, meaning that we're going to get them to think about what they're doing in their play and then extending it out into some real world context and potentially leading them into some inquiry. So it's a nice little stepping stone into that, taking the lead from their play. So I hope that that's a useful answer around that. We've just had a question from Fiona around how are you recording or collating this data? Most of the time it's up here. Most of the time this data that we record is not necessarily for assessment purposes, it's for planning purposes. So I have a little checklist that just lists down all the urges and an area where I can write children's names. It's not for anyone but me, so that I can use that to be able to think about how I'm going to respond to the play. It's not an assessment collection, if you like. We don't have to assess what urges children have and when they have them and all the rest. It's purely for us to note down how we're going to respond to the children in our play and hopefully help us plan with that. So any kind of checklist that helps you just gather that information quickly for your own planning purposes is useful. I'm sure we'll cover some more assessment questions as we go through the hour. The next question we had was any inspiration for invitations to play and provocations, especially nature-based, would be gratefully received. Linda, I wonder, considering you've just popped up from the forest this morning, where Linda's involved in some learning through play with grandchildren at home, whether you've got any ideas around some nature-based provocations or invitations to play.
It's very difficult to advise people when you don't know what sort of outdoor area you've got at your school. But I think one of the biggest things, one of the most important things is to ensure that children have an area in the school that they can almost take over. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't look very pretty and very neat, because children just love to dig for a start. So providing them with real life spades, the little camp spades that you can get, and allowing them to go into an area where basically, once again, it gets back to loose parts. All your large loose parts are there, and they can just play with them. So it looks a bit like a junkyard, really. At the moment in the forest, the grandchildren are very much into fairies. And we have a lot of trees in our forest, and various ones have been earmarked to be particular homes for the fairies. These trees are now being decorated with all sorts of gaudy ribbons and other bits and pieces and they're convinced that the fairies live in these trees. They come out at night, and at the moment they're involved in making doors at the bottom of the trees, at which we're going to number, and they will decide which fairies live in which doors, and they're now writing letters to the fairies telling them what they're doing. And the letter this morning was, we're going to be making doors, sorry, but there's going to be lots of noise happening, because they know that fairies go to sleep during the day. So you know, if you have got some trees in your environment, set up a provocation of some kind where, you know, you've just discovered, hey, there's a door and it's at the bottom of this tree. Now it's easy to make some sort of a door, even if it's out of cardboard for a while, and just say, gosh, I wonder how that got there, and start this whole inquiry, if you like, or this curiosity going on with the children in the environment that you've got. Make the most use of it. I saw a lovely provocation by a teacher where the children were playing in an area that I've just described, where they've got all this junk there, and honestly it looks really like a building site. And she went out and she just started digging, and suddenly all the children came over, and she just kept digging, and they started to find worms. They wanted to dig too, and then once they'd found the worms, they thought, well, how are we going to measure these to see which is the longest worm? And then they rushed off and got some rulers, and then they decided they needed a sign because they didn't want people to come past and start walking on the worms. So you can see how just by going out and being part of it and starting something can actually provoke the children into all sorts of magical play that can be done outside, and also in the process learning lots of things, lots about creatures that live in their environment, etc.
So Stacey, have you got anything you'd like to add in there? Share perhaps some invitations you've been able to do with your kids?
Yeah, I think especially with the outdoor one, there's a few things that spring to mind depending on how far along the play journey each person is, and again, like your environment and what's available to you easily, as Linda was saying. But there's different levels of outdoor, and sometimes outdoor is just getting outside the classroom and what you're going to do to promote and invite play that's just out the door or on the deck perhaps, or and we get more and more nature-based as we go, depending on, you know, accessibility and things like that. So I do think, you know, keeping in mind that when we talk about outside, there's different levels of outside, right? And the key thing that Linda was talking about before around loose parts applies to outside as well. So when we're trying so hard to resource not just inside the classroom, but outside as well, remembering that sometimes an invitation is simply new resources outside, resources that they haven't had before, resources put in a slightly different place than they've used them in before. I think that that's really, really key. And I remember when I was training, and one of the biggest principles in maths was that Dean's principle, that you let the kids have a play and have a tinker with the maths equipment before you necessarily try teaching them anything, because the whole time they're sitting there thinking, I just like to really play with these rods, or you've got really cool little teddy bear counters here, why can't I just play with them? And that you let them kind of play with them first. And I like to think of that in play sometimes as well, that sometimes the best invitations is just, if you've got new stuff, setting it up and being ready to observe to see what it is that they do with them as well. The large loose parts are just a whole nother set of gross motor skills. That's the P&P. That's so much PE and balance and lifting, everything going into that kind of learning as well. So I think it all starts to mold together so that you can see a range of different urges, you can see a lot of the collaboration, but it takes the space, takes the time, and it takes the resourcing and keeping it fresh. So I think that's really important to remember for the outdoor play as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stace. And just a couple of points from me too around play invitations. I think whether it's inside or outside, the key to a successful play invitation is in the sales pitch. You know, I think if we're going to just pop a bunch of loose parts out and hope that the kids will notice them, or pop them out with no sort of bells and whistles around them, then you're taking a gamble around whether or not that children will become engaged with them. Remembering that children notice things at their level, they notice things that are in their vision, and they sometimes need a little assistance to notice new things in the environment. So whether it's a planned invitation where you're taking the lead, you're introducing it through a resource or a book or a video or something like that, or whether it's you putting something out, hoping that children are going to pick up on it and go with it, I think does still come down to how you sell it at the beginning. And it could simply be a case of saying, I've noticed that, you know, several of you were enjoying playing by the big tree yesterday. I wonder if you could see anything different about that tree today, because I think I've spotted something. And it's just enough to allow a little bit of mystery, a little bit of I wonder stuff going on, enough to just hook kids in and engage them into going and exploring and investigating. So really pay attention to that sales pitch. Being able to, particularly if it's to do with any type of socio-dramatic play or pretend play, being able to get in there and play along with the kids as well and wonder. I noticed the other day my two nieces that were with Linda in the forest had mentioned that Bluebell the fairy had written to them, and Bluebell lived in the forest, and all I did in response was say, well, I heard that Poppy and Scarlet and Violet live there too. I wonder if they're there or still living in the forest as well. And you just saw their eyes widen, and you saw the cogs start to turn in their brains, and suddenly it's like, wow, could there be other fairies living in this forest too? And so it's just simply a dropping in of a statement like that, that often is just enough to invite more thinking and more exploration in that play as well. Anna, would you do that as a whole class, the sales pitch? I think it depends on what the invitation is. It does no harm to do it as a whole class, but remembering that whole class invitation approach generally happens during the natural breaks we have, so after morning tea, before morning tea, after lunch or before lunch, or as we start for the day when we've got that whole class coming together, we might do a particular sales pitch then around a particular invitation, knowing that we're probably trying to, I suppose, net in maybe a certain percentage of our class that might be interested in it, but other times it's more what I would call the on-the-run type invitation, like I just explained about the fairies, where you're responding as you're seeing the play unfold, and you're offering something back into the play to help them think about or extend or engage in a different way. But it's throughout the whole thing that sales pitches that play along. So yeah, whole class or individual really depends on what it is that's coming at you from the kids in their play.
And I think that we shouldn't be too worried if it falls flat. It feels a bit, yeah, you feel a bit sort of miffed really when you've got this great idea and you're trying to sell it to children, and actually they don't think it's a very great idea and they sort of ignore it and walk off and do something else. But I think we just have to be a bit thick-skinned about it and keep on going, you know, with these sales pitches that we do, hoping that we'll catch somebody sometime.
Yeah, what's quite interesting is when you've said something and literally no one has heard you, and you stand there and you think, I thought that was a good idea, but clearly not, and you just have to pick yourself up and move on at that point. So fortunately we're all thick-skinned. Anna, what's the best way to gather and record children's interests and curiosities? That's the question that we've got at the moment, and it's similar, I think, to Fiona's one earlier around recording and collating data. My biggest challenge to teachers around assessment, around recording, around collecting data, gathering and recording, and all of the language around collection of information. It's got to come back to why. All right, what is the purpose of what you're collecting? Because that should ultimately inform your practice. You need to be very clear around what the purpose is of you collecting this data. There should be several purposes. Unfortunately, there are many teachers collecting data that don't have a really specific purpose, and we're killing ourselves trying to collect data that we don't need to collect. So first of all, the purpose of collecting data is primarily so that we can plan to respond to our students' learning needs. All right, that's our primary goal as teachers, is whatever information we collect about our learners should inform our practice straight back to those learners so that we are responsive to their learning needs. The second information that we collect would be useful information that aids a school in their strategic planning. So information that might need to go to the board, or something around how we're going to respond to our learners as a collective in terms of strategically planning for our learners as they move through our school environment. So those are primarily the two that teachers need to be concerned about. So if we are gathering and recording children's interests and curiosities, that for me would be solely for the purpose of knowing how to respond back. And we've talked about that around if we're going to collect information around children who are interested in motorbikes or dinosaurs, or have an urge around transformation or construction, that information is going to be local information to us in our planning, so that then we can plan to respond, as we've talked about earlier. In terms of recording it, the only format for me to record that information would be through narrative assessments in terms of reporting to parents. So that's where we're going to be able to start collecting these snapshots of our learners through play and what their interests are and how they are exploring their urges within their play. So those are the three areas I think is for our planning, for strategic planning, to inform strategic planning in the school, and to be able to report to parents. And reporting to parents looks quite different through play than it does what we've done traditionally through school reports and things like that. Anyone, Stacey or Linda, would you like to add on to that?
Yes, I think it's really important too that when you're taking photos of your children in play, be fairly discerning about the photos that you're taking. I think there's a bit of a risk that we can sort of take hundreds of photos and not really have them do anything or go anywhere for any particular reason. Just if you see play unfolding that looks like it's a real sort of high level thinking, problem solving, and children are doing something really quite special, and you'll pick up that knack for knowing which ones that you're going to hone in on, and they're the ones where you take the photos, and then you can start thinking about, okay, this was really powerful learning here, and I'd like to come back and contribute to this and support them and extend. I think, you know, we can be at times wasting time rushing around with our cameras taking all these photos, so just be a bit careful of that.
I think the key is to also remember that if we take a collaborative classroom of 50 children, for example, and you've got 50 children, 56-year-old students, for example, that trying to collate all of their individual interests and urges, and the fact that play is so dynamic and changes as we go every day, and it's they can rush through, they're pre-operational, so they're rushing through and flitting over lots of different things throughout a day. If we tried to keep up with that, we would have a body of information that we couldn't respond to, but it wouldn't be sustainable. And it's not actually what our job is. Our job is to respond where we can, is to support the learner agency, do all of those things that a teacher does outside of just accountability. And I think that sometimes when we try something really new in the classroom, we just want everyone to know that we are trying really hard, and it is justifiable and all of these things, but we'll end up data that's not sustainable, and it's not helpful, and it won't even be current because it's just way too dynamic for us to be able to keep up with. So it's just that part of that mind frame change, that that level of checklisty stuff that we can keep up with isn't the same in a learning through play classroom, that we have to change the template in a way.
What I think we have to keep coming back to is we're in a point of transition at the moment, coming from an approach where we were, we've been trained to keep getting data and lots of data and testing and knowing where our kids are at. And what we're trying to do, as Stacey said, is really adjust the way we're thinking now to being able to, I suppose, take snapshots of our children, which at the time is current information about their play and their interests and their urges. And then use that to communicate as well as to plan from. So that's something that we need to think about in terms of that gathering and recording children's interests and urges.
I think if I can just come in there, Sarah, I think one of the most valuable assessments we can do, though, is in oral language. And I think that perhaps, at the beginning of the year when we start the play program or the teaching through play, it's a good idea to just take a bit of a snapshot of your children with their oral language and see how that unfolds throughout the year. And teachers that have done this have said that the gains in oral language have been absolutely amazing. And I think that that is valuable data for us to start collecting, to see how play's working in our classroom for our children.
Yeah, and we do. We are caught in that never-ending debate about qualitative and quantitative data. So when we're looking at, numbered data, our quantitative data, we obviously can continue to get our reading level information, our number and mathematic knowledge information. We can, to an extent, level writing. So we're still carrying on with those things. And so what we're looking at through play and gathering information and recording information about play is more of our qualitative data, our soft data. And so that's where oral language comes in, because we can use that as a bridge, I guess, between the two worlds. We recommend using the JOST. That's a nice free resource that's supported by the ministry to use, the junior oral language screening tool. If you don't use that whole tool, you can use the section around the describe a picture. You might want to take a look at the cultural appropriateness of the picture that they include in the JOST. I don't think it's necessarily a Kiwi type picture or modern type picture for some of our kids, but it's a useful picture to be able to use, providing that, pre and post data you use the same picture. And the question around senior school, no, there isn't, but I don't see any reason why you wouldn't do the same with a picture at the senior end of the school to gather information. And my recommendation is you actually either orally record the description or use video so that you've got real-time language being used instead of you trying to transcribe everything. And you simply take a recording of the child's description of the picture at the start and one again at the end of the year or whenever you choose to do your post data collection, and you can visually and orally hear the difference in terms of the child's language development over time. So that's a really easy way without getting into a whole lot of more expensive assessment tools. That they are out there, and I would recommend that you, if you want to go down that line, that you contact an SLT. They'll be able to know some of those oral language assessment tools that are available if need be. But just to be able to get a snapshot of your class, that's probably a nice easy one to put your hands on straight away. Corley, I have seen your question about play linked to literacy and maths. I've got some other questions linked to that as well coming up, so I'll loop back to that if that's okay. And I've just answered your question around using the describe a picture if you're time poor when it comes to administering the JOST. That section there is useful. Another question we had here was, we're still expected to continue to take part in school-wide inquiry. Can you suggest ways we can implement this in our play environment? My thinking is that this then becomes teacher-directed play. Is this right? So I'm thinking that this is to do with a particular topic that the school are focusing in on. I know for some schools those topics can be quite wide. I know for first term sometimes it's about manaakitanga or whakawhanaungatanga, or it might be to do with topics, say energy or something like that, where it's quite a big topic. So I think from a play perspective, it's very easy to be able to incorporate that into your play environment, and at times be a little bit more teacher guided, without necessarily taking the time away from child-directed play. Stacey, I might come to you with this one. Any thoughts around how you can support or be seen to be supporting the school-wide inquiry topic while maintaining child-guided play?
Yeah, so one of the first things that comes to my mind is the use of invitations and provocations that we've been discussing in the workshop that been taken yesterday. So that often those static invitations, and like Sarah was saying before, they will need selling in the room and an introduction, and we've talked about that quite a bit as well. It's just that idea that they're a really nice way of breathing a new interest into the room, things that we need to cover. We feel that possibly that's because you need to fall in line with the school inquiry. You can still have invitations that invite that kind of learning. Remembering that invitations can be those short, sharp sessions with you as well. So if there are times when you still want to lead children through something in an invitational way that's quite hands-on with you, as long as it's short and sharp and punchy, then they're still invitations and a really nice way of exposing the children to those ideas that you want to be able to say have been in the room. I still think those use of mat times and things like those shared books, the integration into your deliberate acts of teaching, like your guided reading session. So if you think, for example, if I use something like matariki, that your school would really like you to support matariki learning, then having little workshops on making the kites or things like that, and allowing, so still having those kind of invitations there, but you've got other invitations around the room, shared books. When you're doing your guided reading time, you're sharing some ideas around matariki, then you've actually, for a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, for example, exposing to quite a bit of learning around that is actually going to really fit the bill in terms of coverage of that area as far as a whole school scenario is concerned. So I guess a lot of those things, when we look at it through a play lens, it's just making sure that it's short and sharp and punchy, that you're still integrating where you can, but you're making sure that you're still thinking, when can I hand this over to the students? When can I leave them wanting more? When can I back out? As opposed to making it a big hour-long theme topic lesson. So I think those skills are still really important. It comes back to those loose parts and invitations.
Yeah, and I think too, there are going to be times where in a school setting, say Matariki is a great example of that, where you know, particularly where we've got schools where play isn't all the way through the school. Often we might get someone leading that inquiry who has a great idea that everyone's going to make something, you know, and down comes the template for everyone in the classroom are all going to make this for this inquiry topic. And in that situation, you know, you've got to weigh up, am I going to rock the boat here, or are we just going to do this, get on with it and get back to our play? So it's around thinking, okay, you know, do I play the game here, be part of this for the moment, and assign an afternoon where this is something we're going to do, or do I, you know, go for it and put a bit of a spin on it and put it out to the kids and see if they want to do something slightly different? I don't know. It's up to your learners. But there's always going to be that juggle around meeting school-wide requirements and how that fits within your pedagogy as well. And that depends on how embedded play and the I guess the philosophy of play is in your school environment. So it will feel at times a bit like you're walking on eggshells, and other times you'll have sympathetic colleagues who will be right alongside you and looking at it through a play lens in a different way. Linda, did you want to add in anything there?
Yeah, I think maybe just that we've got to remember that choice comes into this. You know, if we're going to stick to our true pedagogy, it's really about children's choice. And we might set up these lessons to comply to what the school is wanting us to do. But at the end of the day, if we've got children that don't actually want to do it because they're really not interested, then we shouldn't be too worried about that, you know, because if they're not interested, they're not going to learn. And so we don't want to, you know, we don't want to press the point with them. If they're happy to go off and do something else, then that's fine. You know, you've complied, you've gone along with what the school are wanting you to do. Some children will pick up on it, some children will be really interested, and they're the ones that will be learning about it.
Yeah, and I think that that's constantly a barometer, isn't it, for us making a decision about engagement, is how engaged are our learners around this? Am I going to flog a dead horse, or am I going to go with what they're interested in and then see the learning as a result? So again, it's that juggling all the time, and thinking about ways that we can try and allow our children the opportunity to follow their own interests and their passions as well. So a constant juggle, particularly I think for schools who are in this transition between moving from a more traditional delivery of their curriculum into a child-centred or child-guided approach. This is the juggle that we're finding a lot for teachers and schools at the moment. The next question, I'm just watching our time, and I know that the moment I introduce literacy and numeracy into the discussion, it could balloon into a big discussion. So I'm just covering off some little ones before we get to the big stuff. The question was around planning. I think we've talked about recording. The actual question was, do you plan and record play? And I think it's a two-part there around plan and record. Stacey, do you want to talk about planning for a moment?
Sure. Like I think the key basic principles that we talk about a lot is that idea that you are starting to establish a notice, recognise and respond model. Okay, so if you're noticing and recognising the learning that's happening and then responding, that's going to have a massive impact on where the emphasis of your planning lies. So the idea being that it is highly flexible, that you'll have a level of anticipation around where some things can go in the room, but you're being highly flexible. And I think we've touched on that when we've talked about, say, some of the invitations, when you'll set something up and put it there thinking that the children may start exploring science because you'd like them to look at the ramps, and so that's level 1 of the physical world and things like that. And actually they got really into constructing stuff and a whole fantasy game that went with it, and it was great learning, but it wasn't exactly where you had anticipated it was going. That's absolutely fine, because our planning allows us to be really flexible. So I think the first thing is mind frame, and it sounds really holistic. It sounds really kind of lacking in as a kind of tangible factor, but that's where we need to start, because otherwise we just start to think, oh, I better make a spreadsheet and start filling some boxes, you know. So we start with that. We start with realizing that that's going to happen. When I very first started, in order to make sure that I embedded that mind frame, what I did was simply have a book. And in the book was where I was learning to put aside time to notice and respond and reflect on what it is that I could see in the play. So there's really keen observation skills. What are the urges? What are the interests? How long can I sit here? And can I hear the student voice? How do I know that this is what's interesting the children? And learn to make those notes that weren't in diary-like fashion. Nobody wants to sit down on a Friday night from my senior leadership team at my school and read my reflection journals of play this week. You know, as Sarah was saying before, it is about making it purposeful for the children. So anything I'm reflecting on or noticing on in there is a quick notes that tell me what it is that I can do to the third teacher, or invitations, provocations, those things that are going to respond to what's happening in my classroom. That's planning. So it's massive for us to realize that that's actually planning, and it might not be at this point a Google sheet, but it's really important data. And in that book I would have a list of the urges, I would have a list of the functional types of play. So for those of you that have done our foundation course or the upper primary, we were learning about physical play and fantasy play and things like that. And just actually a reminder of the developmental stages as well. What are some of these things that I can see happening with the children in front of me? Now, that is a massive body of work. That is so much more than a rubric around communities or something. You know, this is the person and personalizing learning. If we're going to say that our planning is also going to have a push on soft skills, you want to see those children jumping off the page, right? So it was just that little book that got me going with that. And then in my weekly plan that I had on, you know, just Monday to Friday of what was happening, I would be noting what are the loose parts that I'm putting into my environment the next day or after lunch or wherever, or an invitation that I was putting in to respond to what it is you're playing. Because the biggest thing that people would be wanting to, or should be wanting to see, their priority for senior leadership, if they've got learning through play burgeoning in their school, should be, can the teachers see the learning, see the important information, can they collect that data, and can they respond? So what my book showed was, yep, I'm noticing that and I'm recognizing that it's learning, and what my weekly plan was saying is this is how I've responded. Start there. That's my 2 cents anyway.
Yeah, Linda, did you have anything to add?
No, I agree with Stacey. I think that's a really good way to start, but I think we also need to remember that planning is also what we do with the environment, and that third teacher. So if you stand in your room and look around your room and notice areas where it's troublesome because there's always a big noise there, or children are fighting over equipment, another area where children are not able to get hold of any equipment, it's hidden for some reason. You haven't set up a family corner because children are into family play and that's needing, or there's an obstruction in your room and the flow isn't there. By standing there looking at these areas and reflecting, that is your planning as well. You are planning for learning through play, and just by doing that. So I think it's just as well to remember that planning takes a whole different look when we're talking about play.
Yeah, and I've added a file onto the chat there around a handout we offer in our nitty gritty workshop, which is just a little self-assessment tool, I guess, for you to be able to sit in your classroom and consider those 4 key areas that Linda mentioned around areas of high engagement, areas where there might be a lack of engagement, or there might be disruptive or destructive behaviour in your play. So take a little look at that, and when you are back in your classrooms, it's a useful audit, I suppose, of your classroom to make sure that your environment is responsive as that third teacher. And as Linda said, that is very much part of the planning process, is how you're resourcing the environment for play. My add-on to this discussion is really to add in the extra loop that we have around assessment, and how that assessment contributes to that planning process, because once you've perhaps got your head around what Stacey was sharing around just taking notes and identifying the areas that you want to be able to respond to through that notice and recognise and respond approach, is that our narrative assessment approach kicks in there as well. So the narrative assessment is just simply once you've done that noticing and recognising and responding, to record into the narrative assessment format and link that those observations to the curriculum areas, and that's, by doing that, you're actually recording the links to the curriculum from the play, and then using that information looping back into the noticing, recognising, responding again approach. So it's that very much that cyclic approach around the planning and responding and recognising and then documenting and then back into it again as well. The other thing Stacey touched on was planning for these soft skills. Certainly something that I expect of teachers when I walk into their classrooms and supporting them in their practice, is that I always ask what the key competency focus is for that week in the classroom, and that is not necessarily the same, or may not be the same as what the key competency focus is of as a school, which I know often schools are working through their school values or things that they're promoting, particularly if they're a PB4L school. But what I tend to do is look for a teacher who has recognised in play a particular need around interaction, or around those dispositions or around those key competencies or even around values, and has actually created a specific plan for how to support children to develop those further during play. And so you might have a plan to address the need that children have for learning to share. And so that will be a specific plan that you're working on that week, where you are introducing some key phrases for kids, some key strategies so that they can share more effectively in the classroom. And then part of that is you noticing and responding to it when it's out in the play as well. So that's an area of having an explicit plan for that, so that you're able to be responsive to children's soft skill development or their dispositional development in play as well. Okay. So the question that we had, which is linked to some questions we received through email and some on our chat, around how can we design our play-based environment to be literacy rich, and also the question was how can we bring, I'll just bring the question up here so I get the right, how can we bring all of the play back to literacy and maths? Linda, would you like to go with that one first?
Well, I think it's really important that we see literacy as in a holistic way, and numeracy, of course, as well. But I'll just deal with the literacy at the moment. In our classrooms, many of us have maybe writing tables where the children can go and write. And I would suggest that instead of having a writing table like that, I think that you could respond to your learners by bringing all the writing tools that you need into the play. So whereas we do say that loose parts are so important for play, so are writing and reading tools, and they should be sitting alongside your loose parts. So when children are building something in the classroom, like using the blocks to build a big tower, alongside the blocks should be some writing tools, so that they might want to write a sign that says, be careful where you walk, or stop here, or some other sign that they want, so that it lets people know, other children know, that they actually want the building to stay there. They might have a potions table and start setting it up like a restaurant. So next to the potions table, you would put things that you might see like menus or recipes for different potions that they could put together, or something that they can write on so they can record what they're putting into their potions. Or it might be a shopping list that they want the teacher to perhaps pick up things that they can use in the potions table. So wherever you see the play, alongside the play should be the opportunity to write, because we have to value those sorts of opportunities for writing as much as we value the times that we take guided writing. Children should see that writing has a purpose, and they have a specific message that they want to get out to other children. And by writing it, they're preserving the message, and they're also having an audience, which is really important, as we know. So when you're collecting loose parts, start collecting writing tools as well, and look for so many opportunities for the children to be able to write, as well as continuing in your classroom, your guided writing sessions, your shared writing. Children should be having lots of opportunities to write for themselves personally on what the message they want to give. In the same way, we need to fill our rooms with books that are responding to the urges and the interests of our children. So we need to think, well, we've got these children who are really interested in trajectory. So what could we bring into the classroom that they're going to be interested in looking at? Now, with our little ones, of course, they're not going to be able to read these books, but they are going to be able to look at all the pictures in them and talk about them. And I know when I was in the forest taking my forest children, that one of them brought along an Usborne book on weaponry, and because they were into trajectory. And so they sat for ages poring over this book, looking at the pictures, for at least 20 minutes. And they're both 5-year-olds who couldn't read it, but they were engaging in their reading. And this is what we want for our children. There should be more opportunities for personal reading in the classroom and personal reading of their choice.
Yeah, Stacey, did you have anything to add?
One thing that I found really helpful when I first started with play in a new entrant classroom was looking at some of the looking at the literacy and play through a language, symbols and text lens as well. It stopped me from feeling the need to get a product out of writing from the play and actually looking at more of those opportunities in the play. And I don't think that necessarily that's new to anybody, but I think it's really important to put it out there as well. It's just that idea of it takes that product pressure off you in terms of play, in terms of writing, and making sure that there's evidence of writing and actually looking at it more from an exploration point of view. I know many of you would be aware of it or be using it anyway, but I found as part of my teaching as inquiry, so it would have been about 7 years ago, I suppose, was looking at the emergent ways that children come into writing. You know how we get the scribbles, and then we get scribbles in a line, and then we get symbols, and then we get symbols with finger spaces in them, or things like that, where children are starting to really understand about writing. Having that up on the wall was really important for me, because it was that visual reminder for me that everybody could write, and where everybody is at independently when they're emergent writers, rather than coming in straight away up at 1B, 1A, whatever, however your matrices look for writing, where that is where they start, where actually there's so much more before that. And if we want learner agency for literacy and play with our students, then we need to have a really good mental picture when we walk into the play of what it is that they're capable of. And in the literacy workshop, Linda covers that idea that children come to school with so much literacy ability already, but we can often be looking more from a deficit point of view because we have a benchmark that's really rather high on entry. And having those as visual reminders in the room really helped me to realise that there's a lot of movement that happens independently to get children to that first level on a matrices. And it also was a really big conversation point for our 5-year-olds in the room, that actually everyone can write, and it looks different. There's loads of different resources. We do it in lots of different places, but actually it looks really different too, because I was so surprised how many 5-year-olds had never written before but already had decided they couldn't do it. And it was a really big thing for me to try and turn that around. So maybe there's some things that you can reintroduce into the room that you've maybe used in the past or thought about in the past that have kind of dropped off as things do when we pick up new ideas, and it will make a massive difference to how you see writing in the play.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. And I think just to cover numeracy as well, because I think what we've talked about with literacy is very much the same as with numeracy, that we're looking for opportunities to incorporate maths into play without necessarily throwing out the maths games and saying that this is part of your option of playing here. I mean, obviously, if children want to go and get the counters and they want to go and get the dice and add that to their play, then that's great. But to have maths play solely related to any maths games we might have in the classroom is not necessarily in keeping with the characteristics around the kind of play we're wanting. What we want to do is recognise strand maths in play, which I think is really important, and play offers us the opportunity to allow children to explore strand maths within their play. Remembering that teaching number is something that is needed most explicitly for our children, so that's where you're coming back to your maths, teacher-directed maths lessons, and at times I know many schools are involved with DIMIC now, and that's very much in keeping with understanding maths and context, understanding maths in terms of it being about problem solving and real world situations, and play enables us to be able to do that as well with maths. I was with a class last year trying to demonstrate this to a teacher, and what she had done is shifted from running maths as a very teacher directed way to once a week putting out maths equipment for the children to play with, and that was their play time, but she was limiting them to maths equipment only. So she had out the foam blocks, she had out the Cuisenaire rods, she had out the money, the jelly beans, that kind of thing. And what happened was that the children started creating hamburgers out of the foam mats, the foam blocks, and they started making sandwiches out of the foam blocks. And so all we did is incorporate the language of shape into their creations, and saying, gosh, I can see you've used the triangle there to make half a sandwich. I wonder if you can find the other half, and I wonder if it's going to be a triangle or a square. Or, we were using mathematical language within their play and supporting them in that way. And then I reached over and grabbed some jelly beans, and I said, well, how much is your sandwich? Can I pay you for your sandwich? And that was just enough to invite the children to think about this idea of being able to use money in their play, and to potentially set it up as a little cafe, and it sort of snowballed from there. And these were with 6-year-olds, I think, at the time. So there's plenty of opportunities, recognising that we need that balance, where there is going to be times where we are explicitly instructing in particularly number and particular areas of maths, but also incorporating an idea around more strand maths into play opportunities as well.
And I think, Sarah, if I could just come in there too, that we talked about providing literacy tools in the classroom, and it's no different in maths with the other strands. If you're seeing children making a paper plane and going outside and flying the paper planes, you just need to grab the meter rulers and some chalk and just put them down where they're playing and say, oh, you might find these useful. And that's just an invitation then for them to get into measuring to see how far the paper planes are going, and maybe having a bit of a competition about them. So look at your maths equipment in your room as your maths tools for putting out in the play.
Yeah, thank you. Just a last question before we start to wind things up. Fiona, are you finding there is an impact on further up the school in this learning through play approach to reading and maths? How have schools managed this, if there is? From our experience, there's been a couple of different potential outcomes. What schools are noticing is that when they take the pressure off or take the expectation off around children reaching certain levels in the junior years, that there is a slower growth in reading and maths and writing coming through. So our year 3-4 teachers are often meeting children who are coming through not necessarily meeting the levelled expectation that we would have had. But in saying that, these are also children who are much more independent learners. They're much more managing their key competencies better, their social skills are better. All of those dispositions that Nathan Makaire-Wallace talks about are in place. And what they find is that the children kick into gear when it comes to the more formal side of things much quicker as the year progresses. I think what's been tricky is that our year, particularly year 3-4 teachers, have to adjust their expectations academically and recognise that the children have been supported in much more of a wider foundation of skills in preparation for neurologically being ready for some of that academic learning that we know starts to happen more appropriately at sort of age 7, 8 and 9. So that's been one aspect. There has been an interesting study done in Northern Ireland that was actually the largest play study done so far in the world, where they introduced a new curriculum into their year 1 and 2 cohorts, and they did a comparative between children that were engaged in play and children that carried on with the traditional approach. The focus of the research wasn't actually on this, but they did sort of a side project looking at literacy in particular, and they didn't teach guided reading for the first 2 years that these children were engaged in play, which is not what we're saying in New Zealand. We're saying we can still do this and have children playing, but they took the guided reading instruction right away. Then they looked at their 10-year-olds when these children hit 10 of the 2 groups that were involved, and they found in the first year of this introduction of this new play curriculum and the taking away of the guided reading instruction is that the children who had no guided reading instruction were about 6 months behind their cohort when it came to reading. But by the second year of this, there was no difference between the 10-year-olds coming through. And what the research was put down to, what the outcomes put down to, was actually in teacher capability around teaching literacy. that what they found, and they talk about it in their study, is that the first year that these children arrived, after having 2 years in the junior rooms of no instruction, and it hit these year 3 teachers, as these year 3 teachers had different expectations of the children to what they were instructing. And it took them a year to change their focus, to recognize, okay, I'm getting kids coming in now who I now have to instruct in reading, which I didn't have to do before because I'm a year 3 teacher. So once they'd got their head around that, then the data changed, and these children were, you know, matching similar research around the idea of children catching up at about 10 to 12, no matter where their starting point was. So it's a really interesting study. The authors, there's a lot of them, but from memory it's Walsh, Sproule, S-P-R-O-U-L-E, McGuinness, very Irish name, and a few others, and it was the Northern Ireland study. It was a big study, so there's lots of publications that have come out around it, but that was one particular interesting aspect of the study that they looked at. There's been lots of other studies done. The Dunedin longitudinal study is quite an interesting one to look at, just in terms of developmental stages and how children are set up in the early years and what happens later. But there is a general consensus that no matter the starting point, if you are shifting developmentally appropriately through, you don't have any extenuating things to do with perhaps specific learning needs and things like that. If you're moving through as per normal, then no matter your starting age, you're all going to level out between 10 and 12. We can't be too worried about that. I think that's it. What I wanted to do just as we close is just let you know that we are available during the lockdown information or lockdown period, and by the looks of it, what's going to happen at level 3 as well at this stage. The ministry have made provision for those schools who are currently receiving centrally funded ministry support, certainly the schools we're working with as accredited PLD providers, to be able to assist you to maintain your pedagogical approach through play from a distance. We are having a lot of schools wondering now how on earth that they can support children to continue learning through play in the face of some of the resources coming out that look a lot like workbooks and worksheets and all those sorts of things. So it's really important to be able to have that support. So if you are a school that's receiving centrally funded PLD, we can support with that. If you're not a school that's currently receiving that PLD funding, the ministry, I've been told this week, will be looking at how they can potentially divert some funds to schools to support distance learning and coming on board quite quickly with that. So we can support you with that. If you're interested, just flick me an email and I can let you know more. All our workshops, our level 1 to 3 workshops, so that's our junior classroom, foundation workshop, nitty gritty, role of the teacher, play in the upper primary years, teaching literacy through play in the junior classroom, and play invitations workshops. That's 6 workshops we are now offering online as webinars. These are discounted from our usual face-to-face rates, so they're available. And we are continuing to support individual teachers as well, just to get your head around what's happening and how this impacts both your practice, but also this is quite a nice opportunity to have a bit of time to upskill and engage in some PD from the comfort of your home, hopefully while the kids are asleep and the cat's not jumping on you. So that's just a bit of information about what we're doing. I just wanted to remind you again about why we're doing this today. Here's the information here around donating to the Student Volunteer Army. It would be fantastic if you can, $1, $5, $10, whatever, just drop them some money. That would be really helpful in terms of supporting them to keep doing the wonderful work that they're doing during this time. So thank you everyone for today. I have seen some chats come through very quickly and I will take a look at those, and if I can, I will answer via email. But otherwise, I hope you're all keeping safe and well in your bubbles, and enjoy Easter at home this year. I'm sure you can have extra chocolate because you're stuck at home and you can't go anywhere. So I'm sure there's something in the rules about that. So enjoy. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you again soon.